Welcome back to the Liberating Generations podcast, everybody. I'm Dr. Keesha Ewers, and this is my lovely daughter, Regan Claire, joining us for the very first debut podcast episode from graduate school at Life West Chiropractic College in Hayward, California.
Oh, it's so good to be here.
Our first episode where we're not sitting side by side.
I know. It's kind of weird being away from my safety blanket.
Well, here we are. I'm interviewing my guest, Regan Claire, and she's interviewing her guest, Keesha Ewers. So
Yes,
like we have a guest podcast here.
I love it.
Our subject matter today, because this podcast is all about liberating generations from intergenerational trauma and the impact, I call them the fractals, the seeds of the karma of patterns that occur long before we are even a little sliver of reality in our parents' eyes, right?
Mhm.
Coming to us through generations. And it's not just generations of people, the karma of that, but also when we arrive on planet Earth in the skin that we're in the place in the world that we're in the religious culture, et cetera, educational level, we are imprinted with very specific biases that we're completely unaware of, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Kind of like a jellyfish in water being told that they're in water when that's their reality. They don't know anything else. So how would they describe water? It's just home, right?
Mm.
It's us in the air that we breathe. And so one of the things about healing trauma that's really important is to start to identify the patterns, to recognize the environment that we've been born into, raised in, created for ourselves, and those biases that we carry forward, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So you could call these our perceptual filters, right? How we perceive the world.
Right.
Yeah. We're always making up meanings about things, right?
Mm.
So and those meanings are going to be based on those prior perceptual filters that were built in childhood, long, long before we had awareness that we were building them.
Right.
Yeah. So by the time we reach, your ripe old age of 26 and my ripe old age of 58, we have a few steps that we've taken on the planet in this body, come into contact with lots of different kinds of people and experiences. We now have memories. We have a little Rolodex that we compare everything to. And so the things that wound us through body, speech, and mind will kind of be unique for each one of us, depending on those perceptual filters. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you and I both are engaged in spiritual practices that are helping us to start observing those, recognizing that they're kind of empty of reality,
Yeah.
But that's kind of hard because in Tibetan Buddhism, one of the ways that they talk about perception is that it actually takes a lot of different steps,
Mhm.
17 different steps. And one of the things that they say is, for thousands of years, they've studied the mind, is however you have been perceiving is how you're going to continue to perceive over and over again the same way, unless you stop about midway through your perceptual role
Mhm.
and create a gap,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Instead of reacting, you start learning skillful response by beginning to observe the way your own mind works.
Mhm.
So in the hurt model that we've talked about on this podcast, from my research in 2013, the healing unresolved trauma study that I did, it talks about two different ways that we can engage with the world as adults, right? With a fully adult brain, fully developed. We can either do it unconsciously, where we have maladaptive memory processing loops, where we have not courageously begin the work of self-confrontation, courageously and compassionately.
Yeah.
Or we can take the moments of wounding, which are opportunities for breakthroughs of knowledge and wisdom,
Mhm.
and create a new way of looping, right? A new processing where we courageously, with self compassionate curiosity,
Mhm.
begin to say, gosh, every time I feel bad or I'm hurt or I'm upset or distressed or angry, I'm present. So maybe I have something to do with it. Maybe the way that I see things has something to
Maybe
do
it's not everyone else around me.
with right.
Maybe maybe it's me. Huh.
I might be part of the phenomenon.
No, 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 no. I'm perfect. Just kidding.
So there's this really great saying, again, it comes from Buddhism that I heard many, many years ago that made me stop in my tracks. And it said, rather than have the whole world covered in leather, rather put on your own sandals.
Mhm.
Right. So everybody else doesn't have to guard what they say so that you're okay. They don't have to make the world safe for you. It's not their responsibility to make you happy. Like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, that's so good.
Mhm.
Right. Well, one of the steps along that loop of the ability to create an adaptive memory processing and growth loop with wisdom at the end of it and freedom
Mhm.
is forgiveness. It's one of the steps.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Except that forgiveness, the way it's often thought about is I call it pulpit forgiveness, where you just in your adult mind say, oh, I forgive,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Doesn't usually work very well.
I I think we've all had that experience. Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I certainly have had that experience of, okay, well, I'm told that I have to forgive. So, okay, I'll just snap my fingers and then there it is. But I don't feel it in my system. I don't actually integrate it. And so, yeah, that piece, that pulpit piece, that's very interesting.
Well, I would love, if you don't mind, for you to describe that misalignment or incongruity
Mm,
with uh in the mind saying I've forgiven, but then in the nervous system feeling
mhm,
something quite different. Because you're a student of chiropractic medicine right now, and
yeah,
you're working on bodies, and
mhm.
bodies tell a
Res- with-
different tale, don't
Yep.
they?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's thank you for asking that question. Gosh, before really diving into spiritual practice and the exploration of authenticity and honesty and integrity that I've just kind of thrown myself into over the course of the last year, I certainly had a face that I put on. I had a persona that I showed to the world. And that persona was one of sunshine, of happiness, of just wanting to be easy to get along with. And I think, uh, I think oftentimes people who are socialized female, that can be uh, something that they take on, right? That can be, um, yeah, that can be a story. And so
Or
for me,
Enneagram type 2 people.
we're an Enneagram type 2
See
person.
our podcast episodes on the Enneagram if you don't know what we're saying.
Yes, yeah. The a person, any type 2, like myself, living in their shadow, that can absolutely be the thing that comes to the forefront.
Me
And
too.
so and so are you, exactly. Learned it from you.
I trained you up well.
Well, mom, thank you. But now you're also helping me untrain. So it's been anyway, we can go into that later. That's a whole other
Yeah.
can of worms.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. So grateful for you. Um, anyway, so the old versions of me, yeah, I used to hear forgive, let go, just show love, just feel love, just show compassion. And you can't really intellectualize your way into doing that though. And that's how I used to do it, right? I used to like think a thing in my mind and so then assume it was so, but then my body was saying a completely different thing. My body was going into addictive tendencies. It was craving alcohol, it was craving sugar, it was binge eating and then throwing up. It was telling a whole different narrative of what was going on because my body and my mind were not in alignment with one another. So while my mind was thinking one thing, my body was doing a completely different thing. And so then it was this imbalance, this way of my mind and my body just completely being out of alignment with one another and being honestly, when I get down to it, just being completely out of integrity with one another. And something that I heard a while back was all shame arises from a lack of integrity. I think you told me that probably. And that really resonated with me. I used to be just filled with shame all the time because I felt like I wasn't living a life of integrity and I wanted so desperately to be living a life of integrity. So, yeah, now being on the other side with this year under my belt of sobriety and being deep into a spiritual practice and being back at chiropractic school, um, once again, when I was back at home with you before I got back to school, I could only conceptualize so much how I would be when I was back in this environment, an environment that once scared me so much, that once, um, I had masks galore. I was a masking queen when I was here before, acting like everything was fine. And that's when addiction was thriving the most. That's when I was drinking all the time to cover up all of the hard feelings. And so when I was with you back home, I didn't know how I would do when I came back. I had an idea. I thought that probably the work that I had put in over the last year would probably help me be able to walk through this with a lot more ease, but I wouldn't know until I got back here. And now it is just the most liberating, empowering feeling in the world to be able to walk through these hallways and past students that I used to be so scared of, that I can now walk past them with true unconditional love for them, just sending them nothing but love. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean I'm going up to them and wanting to be best friends with them. No, it's a boundary there for sure. It's it's absolutely a boundary that I have around myself, but it's not one of guarding. It's one of just unconditional love.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's so beautiful. So, what are some examples? I know during the 9 months that you were here at home, really embodying sobriety, you would often, is there a word that's more often, frequently, all the time? Ask me.
What's more than often? All the time? Yeah.
But that's hyperbole. So, it's just a notch down from that. Asked me to stick my elbow in the spot on your back because it was
Oh,
so tight, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and we all have different patterns in our bodies that hold on to tension, old wounding. They are, you could even say that these dense areas, these tight areas, these constricted areas are undigested fear, undigested anger, undigested whatever, anxiety, which is fear, right? And this that contracted feeling, if even if you people that are listening right now, if you take a deep breath into your belly, nice big diaphragmatic breath through your nose. Mm. Exhale with a nice sigh. Mm.
Mm.
So you're breathing so that when you inhale, if you have your hand over your tummy, it comes out pregnant. You're pregnant with your own inhalation. So that's the first part that inflates when you do this kind of breathing. And then you draw the breath up into your chest. So you're fully breathing your body. Your body is being breathed. The breath is breathing you.
Mhm.
In that moment when that's happening, a nervous system response is following it. You cannot be anxious and breathe that way. You
Mhm.
cannot feel anxiety and love at the same time in your body. They're impossibilities. They're dualistic, polar opposites. And so, the body is this remarkable wisdom carrier. We're so brain centric. We're very, very seduced by the neurological system and the brain. And, it's like the science that I can roll out about this. People love it, right? They eat it up. And the mind is not the brain.
Mhm.
Mind is everywhere. Mind is not restricted to brain.
Mhm.
And so mind is also in body. Body has so much information for us, and you're there becoming a doctor in that work. And so, the thing that I think our listeners can really drop into is I have patients that will come to me and say, I've done work on this trauma, this thing that happened, this whatever it is for years. And yet they'll
Mhm.
still have an autoimmune disease or they'll still have chronic physical pain of some kind. They'll be depressed, they'll be anxious.
Yeah.
And, I don't say this, but the response needs to be, and yet here you are still. Because
Right.
it's in layers, right? We shed this stuff, we unfold it, we gently release it. We do this. It's not a now I'm done ever,
Mhm.
right? We're organic beings in an organic environment with experiences that are always happening and our bodies respond.
Mhm.
And it's through nervous system patterning that was set up long, long ago in childhood. So this is an important, you were talking about how, I don't know if I'm allowed to say her. Someone,
Go for it. Go for it.
someone in school, just say, we won't say if they're a professor or a student or, or a visitor,
Yep.
was just talking about adjusting the body and not talking about food.
Oh, yes. Yeah. You can
And when
talk.
we talk about food and when we talk about the body as separate things, it kind of reflects what's in the medical paradigm of thinking of psychology as separate from medical
Mhm.
care, right? They're not different. So psychosomatic, we talk about these things as if, right, they're separate, and yet they are so not, right? The body has mind. It has mind is in the body. It has its own wisdom. That's always trying to communicate with us. So I'm curious about what are some of the things that you find, like even in your own experience or people you have adjusted or palpated,
Mhm.
like instant tears when something gets touched. I've had that experience in massage.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I can reflect back to my own journey through chiropractic medicine, going into school 2 years ago and getting introduced to BGI, biogeometric integration, which is not a technique of chiropractic, but it is a tool that enhances chiropractic. And I remember my first, they call them hookups. So I remember my first time getting hooked up. Um, One of my mentors was hooking me up and she was doing my interior side and she went to my heart area and just had me breathe into this space here and I wept. I yeah, I took a big deep breath in and then just had this instant release and it was in that experience that I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. To mind you, a plethora of other issues arose within my body, that were beyond just that one experience. But you talk about the knot that I used to have in my back, and me asking you, anyone really, it used to be like it felt like it was protruding from my back,
Yeah.
and I could never take a deep breath in. It felt like it would radiate all the way up my the right side of my neck into my cranium. It was awful, and so I would have people take their elbows and just go as hard as they could into that spot, and it's like no matter how much pressure they put in there, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough release, and now I mean, of course, it was my body trying to tell me something. It was deep, deep-rooted fear and anxiety of being found out. That's ultimately what it stemmed from, and I
Mm,
remember that not developed around when I was 17 when my eating disorder started. I can really trace it back to that time period. And
mm,
so now with the work that I'm doing, it's ongoing. As you said, it's not all of a sudden you wake up one day and it's done.
yeah.
It's and that's what sobriety has actually taught me. I wanted to touch on that for a second. That sobriety, there's no finish line. And I used to be someone who was always looking for the finish line, for the mark to be hit. And spiritual practice is never over. You wake up every day and you do it.
Mhm.
Sobriety is never over. You wake up every single day and you just do it. And
Dishes, laundry, exercise, brushing your teeth.
Mhm. It's never over. It's
Never over. Yeah.
and now I see it as a gift. Now I actually enjoy doing it. It's because I see how much it enhances my life, because I can see the way that my body used to be just so tightly wound. Like, people would look at me in school, my mentor would look at me in school and say, "Breathe." She could tell that I was completely locked up. She could tell that I was in just constant fight or flight mode
Mhm.
about people hating me, people looking at me wrong, people talking about me behind my back. It was all externally outward centered. And I was completely incapable of reflecting inside and asking my system, what is it that you need?
So can we do a process?
I would love that.
We can, and we'll do it with me too. And we'll trace. I call it tracking your hurt.
Mhm.
This is what forgiveness is, just to define it as we do this process. Forgiveness is not saying I forgive somebody.
Mhm.
Forgiveness is relinquishing the self perceived right that you think you have to punish them for
Mhm.
you being hurt,
Mhm.
right? It's relinquishing the role you believe you have in judging them so that they can't hurt somebody else
Mm.
or making them suffer,
Yeah.
right? Forgiveness has another part to it that I rarely see anyone else talk about. So this was in my doctoral research, and I studied forgiveness very deeply as an intervention for chronic illness for this reason.
Mhm.
The little tail on the end that I find doesn't get practiced is forgiveness is also the willingness to self-confront and find yourself in your perpetrator.
Mhm.
And so, you've talked about a group of girls when you were young. Are you okay doing this?
Yeah, of course.
Who
Yeah.
created the I Hate Reagan Club.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So right now I've got two parts of me. One is the mama bear who wants to just go hurt some people. I even did this to my daughter.
Oh.
And the other one is okay, it's all empty. All karma. It's all for the path of growth.
You have to feel the thing before you can get to the point that says it's all empty.
Oh, I'm noticing just like, whoa. So
Mhm.
the I Hate Reagan Club, and that when you discovered that your so-called friends had created this online presence, cyberbullying, what did you feel?
Mm. sadness, shame, maybe like they were right,
Mm.
that there was a reason that
That's a belief, not a feeling.
Mm.
What do you feel?
Fear.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Fear, because our limbic system is put there. Fear is actually good. Fear is so helpful for us for survival because, if a great big saber-tooth tiger is snarling with a cub next to it, fear makes you say, I need to get away. I need to leave this alone because I'm going to die if I don't, if I keep going. Fear helps us know that, oh, if you eat certain kinds of berries or mushrooms without knowing about them, then you might die. Right.
Mhm.
So it helps us to survive.
Mhm.
Yeah. Don't walk off the cliff because then the canyon underneath you isn't soft. And
Mhm.
so fear comes up as a way for your system to stay alive.
Mhm.
So fear is not bad. We are wired to know back in tribal days that I'm describing right now that if we're put on the outside of the firelight circle, then that's a scary place to be because a saber-tooth tiger can eat us if we're not
Mhm.
surrounded by our tribe.
Yeah.
And so when tribe rejects you, right? This
Mhm.
is this is something that's going to create not just fear, but panic and terror. Because
Mhm.
your Enneatype says, if I'm just nice, then people will like me because that was the agreement you had in your family of origin. But other people don't agree to your expectations,
Mhm.
right? So then the fear also comes up when you're at that age and stage of development that, oh no, the strategy I have for getting my needs met in the world and becoming part of the tribe, being a part of the tribe isn't working. So there'll be real terror about that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, the script I've been taught, I have the wrong one.
Mhm.
Yeah. How old were you when this happened?
7?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, when you're working with forgiveness, one of the things that you do is you go get that disempowered, right? We're not autonomous, powerful beings when we're children.
Mhm.
So your older, wiser being that you are now and your mama can go scoop that 7-year-old up and bring her to our laps, right?
Mhm.
Comfort her and let her know there's nothing wrong with her. She's an absolute beautiful gift to this world.
Mhm.
And sometimes people aren't going to like you, and that's their right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Not everyone's going to like you. The ones that don't, just have a good boundary with them and keep your head held high and go find your tribe.
Mhm.
There are people that you probably don't like as you grow up too,
Mhm.
right? And so that's the wisdom she needed to hear at that time period. So we
Mhm.
give her the wisdom. Then, as the adult 26-year-old who's doing an actual forgiveness process, right? So you reclaim your power for your little one, repair her fractured attachment bond right there with her friends and herself and
Mhm.
her script, right? Then you look in the heart of the people who made the I Hate Reagan Club and you witness their own suffering that caused them to do this, right?
Mhm.
Of course they were. And and then say, okay, so what are, let's say, 3 personality characteristics that would cause them to do this behavior?
Mhm. Mm. You asking me?
Mhm. What do you come up with? Just pick one of them or 2 of them, and
I
what
would
what are some personality traits?
I would say, jealousy and comparing.
Okay. Another one?
Um, Powerlessness.
Okay. So a dysfunctional way of gaining power, right? Yeah. So let's start with comparing. So then you look in the mirror and you say, do I do this thing? Like
Mhm.
you wouldn't ever create a club call it the name of a person that you were trying to exclude. So we don't focus on the behavior when we're forgiving. People get all tangled up with this. Okay. Yeah. So when I had to forgive my sexual abuse perpetrator, I didn't focus on that, right? That's not the thing I'm forgiving. You're
Mhm.
not condoning bad behavior. You're not forgiving the behavior. You're forgiving the people, right? So when you look at the mirror of comparing, do you ever compare yourself to others?
Absolutely. Yes.
And measuring, right? How do I stack up? And so when you see the outcome of that, you can look at that and then you can bow to them and say, "Oh my gosh, thanks for teaching me that lesson so beautifully."
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a one-way street to suffering right there, to compare and despair, right?
Yeah.
Social media is such a great
Yes.
platform for that.
Really.
And then jealousy. Do you ever get jealous?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So another one where you can say, well, how do I do that? It's different than the way they did it. Okay, jealousy. That's okay. Thank you for showing me that one. Right.
Mhm.
And then powerlessness. Do you ever feel powerless
Yeah.
and have dysfunctional ways of gaining power?
Mhm.
That's where eating disorder and alcoholism came up with, right?
Mhm.
Come up- Yeah. And so then you can go, oh my gosh, thank you. Yes. Right. Those dysfunctional strategies cause suffering too. So then you can really say, like to your source team, to your older, wiser self, please help me to notice when I'm engaging in those traits so
Mhm.
that I can create a more skillful response in life rather than that sort of reactivity, right?
Mhm.
And then you can bow and say thank you and then forgive them because now you can see you're on equal ground,
Yeah.
right? When we're judging ourselves as superior, it's very difficult to forgive, right? And then
If
what
you
you
have a
say,
superiority complex sorry, if you have a superiority complex, just ram your car into the side of a building and you'll probably get over that really quick. Really, just if you're looking for some tools. Anyway, go on.
or go into medicine and have everyone tell you, that, yeah, yeah, this is that you're not helping them in any way, shape, or form, and
Yeah.
that you're responsible for healing them.
Yeah.
Any kind of when you own a business too, it's a really great way of coming up in front of that stuff because you're always going to make people unhappy. You're always
Yeah.
going to disappoint people, and it doesn't matter what walk of life you're in. You're going to be disappointed by people, and you're going to disappoint people, and that's the way it works. And the opposite is true too.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's where you forgive from a space that down regulates your nervous system because now you get to go forgive the parts of you that have engaged in behavior that's very different from your perpetrators, but motivated by the same traits because we all have the same exact personality traits. We
Yeah.
just do them differently. So it makes us look different, right? And we behave differently, but we all have that compare and despair, jealousy, right? When we're powerless, dysfunctional ways of gaining power if we haven't learned more skillful means.
Yeah.
So this is such a beautiful opportunity then to engage in self forgiveness, which you have been on over the
Mm.
last year. It's been really beautiful,
Thank you.
really beautiful. So
Mm.
how do you feel?
I feel amazing.
How does your little heart space where that knot gets
Oh
off?
my gosh. I mean, I've talked to you about this before, but I feel so much gratitude and
Mhm.
love, and
Yeah.
this space is just so blast and open.
So when you first went down to school, you were the little 7-year-old who was worried about the I Hate Reagan Club reinvigorating itself, and it did
Mhm.
because of that. And
Yeah.
you engaged in your very same strategies, right?
Exact ones.
Very
Just
same.
love me, like me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll spend my student loan money on on making brunch for everyone. Just
Mhm.
love me, please. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So now that's over. Thank
it's
goodness.
over. She's gone. She doesn't give a hoot if she's liked or not.
So I had a patient this week. This is why this topic came up as a podcast moment. And then I have a forgiveness program that I'm going to teach live in 2 weeks. And it's because of this patient
Mm,
who asked me, uh, your story that you talk about when you were diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when you were 30, you changed your life. Like you changed the way you eat, you changed the way you think, you changed, everything. And you reversed your autoimmunity. But then you said you got breast cancer 10 years later. How is
mm,
that possible if you stayed on the things that you said you did when you reversed your autoimmunity?
mm,
Yeah. And I said, well, if you've really heard that story, then it was because my son told me that he and his brother, probably your sister, had been victims of sexual abuse from a neighbor boy when I
mhm,
was at the grocery store one day. And I was so distraught that on my watch, my children had been hurt to
mm,
this degree. And I went into, you know, them going into therapy, talking to, having, it was really amazing process. Actually, I found him. We had a really long discussion. I brought the kids into it. Like it was
mm,
remarkable. And a lot of forgiveness happened, between all of them.
mhm,
But and I had forgiven him as the kids had forgiven him, and a bunch of different really beautiful outcomes that come from that. But 4 months later, I was diagnosed with cancer, and it was a tumor that was right over my left breast, in my left breast, right over my heart, right? And when I saw it on the monitor, on the ultrasound screen, I was I knew exactly what it was made of. It was made of self-contempt,
mm,
self-loathing, self-hatred
mhm,
that was to such a degree that it had taken form in 4 months. And I knew when I saw it there that I would die if I didn't forgive myself. I knew it was because of my own self-contempt that I hadn't been aware of until I saw that tumor. So I went straight into trauma healing, and oh, it was I just wouldn't. I couldn't forgive myself. I couldn't do it.
mm,
And I remember just, it and clinical hypnotherapy that you and I are both trained in, and your sister, I had these 4 teddy bears that I was holding, and I was on my back, and I was just sobbing and saying, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And and I just couldn't. I could just see the woman who, with you, the baby, on my hip, opening the sliding glass door, looking down at the trampoline in the yard where they were all jumping. And, the neighbor boy was 12 and a good friend of our family. And his mom was my running partner. Like we were really good friends. And Kendall and Cameron and Colin were all jumping on the trampoline playing with him. And I just remember calling down and saying, "Hey, do you want to just stay and babysit while I go to the grocery store? And I'll pay you when I get back," and saying some other things. There's stuff in the fridge, da, 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 da. And all I could do was my older self look at that scene and just
mm,
scream at her and call her names, like, "You lazy, blah, 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 blah. Just get your kids and take them to the store," and because of course it was about convenience. I didn't want kids to get whiny about having to stop their plane. I didn't want to have to be slowed down in my grocery shopping because I had 4 kids. And, just it was all lazy, convenient stuff. And all I could do was just like pour that onto her, and I couldn't forgive her. And I remember the woman that was working with me when I was sobbing and saying how sorry I was. She, I could hear her crying. And I opened my eyes and I looked at her and she said, I wish my mother had cared this much when this happened to me. And I remember that was the portal, right? That was the portal, was compassion for her not witnessing, like realizing that her witnessing me with all the remorse and sorrow and regret was healing for her, right? And and then understanding that I was actually perpetrating abuse on my younger version with 2020 hindsight,
Mhm.
you know, and that it wasn't fair to her really. I mean, yes, it was a matter of convenience that caused me to yell down and say, "Do you want to just stay?" And I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so, and then as soon as Cameron said, I don't want him to come back and babysit us, I immediately started investigating and didn't find anything out, but I didn't have him come back.
Mhm.
And so the interesting thing about all of that was my desire to hold on to my self loathing. And I thought that was really fascinating when I was doing my processing. I thought, why do you want to hold on to that shame? Right. So the ideal of being a perfect parent eliminates karma that happens and the lessons we're all supposed to learn through,
Mhm.
and the desire to keep, you know, like a magical memory Rolodex for my children was not serving them,
Mhm.
and being able to teach them ways and means of dealing with the inevitable challenges and traumas that do occur in human life. And so I had to work with all of that, like these different beliefs and meanings I had as a mom.
Mhm.
So when I really did deeply learn how to let that go and forgive myself and scoop her into my arms, yeah,
Yeah.
this version, and hold her while she sobbed. Yeah. Not just my children, but also her.
Mm.
That was my cancer went away. I didn't have to change my diet again because it was already really good, That's the thing. And that's what I don't think people understand is, Ayurvedic medicine says the body is the canvas of the mind.
Mhm.
And so whatever you're clinging to, whatever you're holding on to, attached to in some way,
Mhm.
there's a story that you feed off of in some way
Yeah.
of suffering. And when you're willing to let it go, then forgiveness can actually happen. But it
Mm.
isn't fair to hold your younger version to the knowledge base and the skill set you have today.
Mm.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Including your 17-year-old who developed an eating disorder. She didn't know, right? So self-forgiveness, just as important as forgiving others.
Mm.
And it literally will kill you if you don't engage with it. Mark Twain said, if you don't forgive another person, it's like you drinking poison and expecting the other guy to die.
Mhm.
Same for yourself.
If you can't forgive yourself, then you can't forgive other people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way it is. We're all in the same grid. We all are the same.
Yep.
So if you are holding on to something that someone else has done to you, there's a story in there that you're not forgiving yourself for something you've done to yourself.
Yep.
It all stems from within. That
Yep.
and that in a way, there's freedom that lies in that. You
It
don't
is so liberating.
so liberating. You
Yeah.
don't need to make amends with another person who may have done some wrongdoing to you because that liberation quite literally comes from within yourself.
Exactly.
the freedom to heal is right here.
Now, reconciliation and forgiveness are two different things. So I want to bring this onto the table too. Reconciliation means that you get back into relationship with another person. You don't do that
Mhm,
if that person has not established wrong, accepted that there was some wrongdoing and established a desire that's clear that they're going to act on it to become more skillful
mhm,
in their own way of being. And so boundaries are really, really important. And so the thing that I think another thing in the research that shows why people are unwilling to forgive is because they think that means they have to reconcile with the perpetrator, and that is not true.
mhm,
You don't have to do that. Yeah. So forgiveness is not condoning bad behavior, and it's not reconciliation.
mhm.
So then there's no danger in real forgiveness the way that we're talking about
Right,
it.
right. Like
Oh, freedom and liberation, right?
mhm,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
Mm,
And the other piece is in the intergenerational thing is again that hindsight thing of 2020,
mhm,
forgiving parents, grandparents, generations that
mm,
were not as skillful because it generationally wasn't in
mhm,
their purview, right? Because remember those biases we first talked about, the imprinting of a culture.
yeah,
Yeah. And so making sure you're not holding over somebody's head that isn't as perhaps skillful in their means, that they didn't do something the way that you think they ought to have.
mhm,
Forgiveness means really looking in the mirror and seeing where are the places that you perhaps are not as skillful, and can you forgive this person and not expect them to be something they aren't.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
mhm,
did that to my mother for years, expected her to be something she wasn't. And that's another form of abuse, right? When I say I did that to my mother, that's because that's what I was doing. And, I always thought she should be
mhm,
warmer, more, more compassionate, less judgmental, whatever the things that I thought, right?
right,
And that was my Ania type speaking. What I wanted from a parent or caregiver wasn't necessarily what was agreed upon. And
mhm,
so, you have to know what the people around you are good for, and then you provide that for you.
mhm,
That's not up to other people. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm.
What else do you have to say about forgiveness, Reagan Claire?
I don't know that I have anything more to say that hasn't been said already. Yeah, just when it happens, it's liberation.
And you can feel it in your body.
Feel it in your body.
Your
I can
breathing is
breathe.
your
I can
pain
breathe.
pieces. Yeah.
Every time I go in for into an adjustment with my student intern, we do soap notes and we ask what's going on, if there's anything of concern that we should know, if there's any pain in our bodies. And for the last 4 weeks, every week that I go in, I'm like, no, asymptomatic. I don't feel anything. I feel just really good. I know.
That's so wonderful.
It's cool that I can actually track when I first started 2 years ago to where I am now, my new patient paperwork back then in my chart is so vastly different from what my new patient paperwork looks like with this new intern. He and I have actually talked about it. He's like, wow. He took my blood pressure the other day and it was like so much lower. So much lower. Like actually shockingly low. And he was like, how did that happen just in 2 years? And like, I didn't say this, but of course, like, well, I'm sober and I meditate daily and I exercise daily and I eat really well.
Mhm.
And seriously, you do all of those things and you engage in forgiveness practices, it's your body will reap the rewards.
I think that's a good place to end.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm. Thank
All right,
you.
everybody. Until next time, be well.